he's just due. At least he's shooting now. I mean, there were times where he'd have a breakaway and he'd look to see who he could pass it to. Like,
Yeah,
oh man,
the shots are adding up like that.
yeah,
That's a really good point because you do love to see that. And at some point, with a player of Phil Kessel's talent and that shot that he has, which is, I mean, for my money, one of the best shots in the league, that has to start going in. It absolutely has to start going in. Sidney Crosby mentioned it last night too. He said, at some point, he's just going to bust loose here, and we can all feel it coming. So, hopefully for the Penguins, that's pretty soon because they could really use that guy down the stretch.
yeah, yeah. Now, one thing about their little win streak they have going is, or at least point streak, I should say, is they've done it without two, and really with Mata, 3 of 4 of their best defensemen. Letang and I mean Dumoulin came back last night, but you know, it's like when they got hurt, I heard Jack Johnson say it brought them all closer together because they realized, oh no, what are we going to do now? We don't have our 2 best defensemen. What are we going to do? And they just, they came together as a team. It's pretty amazing what they've been able to do without Letang.
It really is. I think anybody would have been hard pressed to see how good the results would have been without Letang and also all these games without Dumoulin. But I made a joke, not really even a joke, but a comment after that happened of, oh, here's where they band together, and here's where they make the playoffs, and just go on a tear just to spite everybody. And it kind of feels like, to me, that's the time-honored Penguins way. You've seen it time and time again. They lose a major player. They lose Sidney Crosby for a long period of time. Evgeny Malkin steps up. They lose Malkin for a period of time. Crosby steps up. They lose. They just get player after player after player injured, and now they've added. They had all of those guys down, and then next game they lose Brian Rust and Chad Ruedel in the same game, and you're like, how is this even possible? These guys just keep dropping like flies. And I think with every loss, the resolve grows of, okay, we just have to band together and get through this. And I think part of it is really that sort of us against the world resolve and mentality. But I also think part of it is it forces the Penguins on a practical level to simplify their game, which is probably the best thing that could happen to them.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're this team that just overthinks when they have all of this talent out there. And Chris Letang is one of the most typical guys you can think of who has been guilty of it in the past. You have this incredible collection of talent out there overthinking, okay, I'm going to make this stretch pass, to nowhere that's going to end up going the other way. And it's just the kind of thing that they do when they have all of that talent. And I think they get a little, maybe a little too wrapped up in their own abilities. And when you don't have that and you just have to play the simple game, look how that's going for them. So I really think that maybe it's a blessing in disguise.
Exactly. I was going to say that. And another maybe blessing in disguise is well, Jack Johnson seems to be a lot better now that he's on his natural side, and Gudbranson seems to be fitting in pretty well.
Yeah, I really think Gudbranson came in sort of not getting a chance right off the get-go. People just, immediately, okay, we've seen tape of this guy. He's terrible. Here's exactly what he's going to do in Pittsburgh, like he's done everywhere else. And when you hear words from Jim Rutherford, like the words that struck me as sort of the alarm where I got concerned was he was asked a question at the press conference when he acquired Gudbranson. He was asked, okay, so when you look at this guy's analytics over the years, they are very unkind, and when you look at that, how do you analyze that player. What is it that you're looking for from that player when you decide to acquire him despite that? And Rutherford said, well, with a player like that, that's not what you're looking for, which reads to me like, we don't care. Like, we just disregard all that. And you have to shake your head like, oh no, oh no. Like, yeah, there there are people on every team in hockey in that business for a reason. It's because the stats don't lie.
Right.
If you have a really long history from a certain player saying that they sort of consistently play a certain way, probably the pattern is probably there for a reason. So I think of these poor guys who are on the stats team for the Penguins hearing that and just think their heads probably explode when they hear Jim Rutherford make a comment like, well, we don't care about that when we look at this guy. But and then he talks about heart and grit and character, and you just hear all these words and say, oh no, what's he doing? So,
yeah, if I'm running the analytics for the Penguins, I'm like, so should I just take the week off? Do you even care what I think? Or
should I just resign because does it even matter? Like, what am I doing here? But so you hear that and you really cringe. But I have to say, with the you are right. First of all, that Jack Johnson has been. You can't deny that he's been noticeably better since he's been on his correct side. He seems to be a pretty good pairing with Justin Schultz, which has been, that's like a 2-for-1 comeback with Schultz getting back into the lineup. You get Schultz back, and hopefully you get something out of Jack Johnson that you weren't getting before, which is, maybe a little less of a liability of a defenseman than he was, because that was really the concern was how often he seemed to be on the ice for those sort of glaring errors. And I think Justin Schultz has really calmed down that part of his game. And Erik Gudbranson, with the exception of last night when he was on the bad end of that sort of unfortunate tip in on that first goal, I haven't noticed really any instances of him looking like what he was advertised to be before he came to Pittsburgh. So maybe that's just luck so far and the team being on a hot streak, but perhaps he's found a good spot for himself. But so far so good there. And one thing when you hear the Penguins' opponents, like I think what really struck me when Jim Rutherford made that deal was that I don't know if you see him make that deal if guys like Chris Letang and Sidney Crosby aren't out there trying to get into fights in the previous couple of games. And against the San Jose Sharks, you have Crosby go down on the ice backwards with no helmet. You have Chris Letang have what happened to him in Philadelphia in the outdoor game, a guy with a concussion history and a neck injury. Now he's out with that apparent neck injury. And I think you just look at it and say, maybe these aren't the guys I want standing up for this team. And so I'm really not surprised he went out and said, okay, well, we let Ryan Reeves go, and maybe it's time to do that again.
Yeah, and Gudbranson apparently has a history of fighting Tom Wilson, so we'll see. But I heard them ask Letang about that, and he said, "Yeah, I stuck up for my teammate, and I do it again." Like, okay, that's nice, but that's
but don't do that.
Yeah.
Please don't do that anymore, especially with your history, with your, first of all, the type of player you are, please don't do that. And secondly, with your medical history, please don't do that. It really makes you cringe. But then you hear what I was going to say before was you hear a comment like apparently Evander Kane made a comment. Did you hear about this?
I heard that. Yeah.
About, who on this team's going to do anything about it?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Like I'm not saying that's an excuse to go out and acquire, a tough guy. And by all means, if you go out and acquire a tough guy, he better be able to play, because there's no space in this league anymore for tough guys who can't play. So hopefully he's got the right guy in Gudbranson. But I think when you hear that, I mean, I'm not surprised when you're Jim Rutherford if your blood boils a little bit. Like
Oh
I
yeah.
hear that and my blood boils a little bit. Like, oh man, the disrespect. That's terrible if you have teams thinking, okay, nobody here is going to stop me. That's no good.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean that's the reason they got Ryan Reeves. It's gosh, just the beatings the Penguins took, like physical beatings during those playoff runs, were ridiculous. And if the refs aren't going to do anything, it's like, okay, fine, we'll take matters into our own hands. And Reeves didn't work, so yeah, we'll see how this is. But it's interesting that he put Pettersson and Goodbranson together. They're both giant trees. They're both like sequoias out there. What did you do? Did they just form like a chain and say, okay, you can't pass. We're forming a wall around us. I dare you to pass around us with their
Oh,
giant reach.
that pairing's hilarious. And then at one point last night, I noticed Gudbranson on the ice at the same time as Nick Bukestad, and same thing. I was like, oh my God, those are some very, very large men out there. And I guess it's funny because a couple of years ago, the Penguins were setting the gold standard in this league for speed. It doesn't matter even if you have a bunch of small guys like Connor Sherry. Just it's speed, and that's what's going to kill you is speed and skill. And now it feels like they're almost taking a step toward, okay, if we're a little slower, it's okay. We're going to get size, or we're gonna get some bigger guys who are maybe a little bit stronger and can sort of bring that little bit grittier of a presence. So maybe that's the Penguins acknowledging that they're going to play a slightly different way. And I do think they have started to adjust their game a little to play a slightly different way, because I think they get that they have perhaps lost a step in comparison to some of the other teams in this league now. But I also think that the Penguins showed to me last night when you watched that game, the Penguins, when they have to be a speed team, and against Montreal too, who's a really fast team, I think they're able to keep up with those teams when they really, sort of put their focus on being a fast team. And they're going to have to expend the effort and energy to do that, but I still think they have the ability to do that too. So it's an interesting time of evolution for the Penguins, trying to figure out what their identity is and what their game's going to be, I think.
I think they're trying to be all things. I mean,
Yeah.
because look what he did. Look what Sullivan did against Montreal. It's like, well, they have a fast team, so I'm going to put McCann up there with Crosby and Guentzel, and have a really fast line. So
Yeah.
I think that's what they want to do, is maybe change things up depending on the opponent. So we'll see how that goes.
Which is
Are
actually tremendous, because how often did you hear, oh, Dan Bylsma can't make adjustments,
Yeah.
adjust to other teams. And if Mike Sullivan can adjust to other teams and can tweak his lineup to fit what best meets that opponent, how great would that be going into the playoffs? So it's pretty exciting to see your coach do that, I think.
Yeah. Now, so and McCann was up there with on that first line last night also. Um,
Mhm.
and Zach Aston Reese is with Malkin and Kessel. Do you see that continuing, or I don't know if Zach's time might be up on that second line?
I don't know. I think Zach Aston-Reese I think what they're looking for there is sort of the Patrick Hornquist presence, because, Zach Aston-Reese really does have the potential to be that kind of player, to, chip in some goals from those areas in front of the net, but also bring sort of that presence to the line where he is opening up space for the other players on that line. So I think that's what they're looking for from him. And for now, I think I don't think it's paying off yet, really, in terms of the offense that they'd like to see from that line. So that to me is what's going to decide it. The Malkin line really is what you need to see producing on a more consistent level. And obviously Kessel is still having a really hard time with finding the net. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him continuing to tweak those lines just to see what works and to try to get